There's nothing worse than drafting a player who doesn't pan out for you, and over the years, we've been able to identify these exact players at a pretty high clip. And in this video, we'll look at those 10 players that you're going to regret drafting at their current ADP right now, and you should just let your friends draft them instead. And we're going to start with the Colts wide receiver, Michael Pittman. And again, this is at their current ADP, average draft position. All these guys, for the most part, are great players, including Pittman, but right now he's going in round 3 and sometimes round 2 of drafts. And when you start to go that early, we have to take a pretty close look, a critical eye at you. And look, the guy's been as consistent as ever since entering the NFL a few years back. How consistent, you might be asking on the other side of your screen? Well, you see right here, since entering the NFL, the targets have only gone up. From 2020 when he was a rookie on a part-time role, missed some games with injury. Since then, basically been a staple of health, only missing 1 game per or 2 total games the last 3 years, and the targets really skyrocket, 129, 141, and then a career high 156, and the impressive part, 109 receptions. So as good as it possibly gets, shouldn't we be liking him? Well, it's a pretty compelling case, especially when you see over the last 3 seasons, his receptions at 296. You see he makes this list number 7. The only guys ahead of him are a bunch of studs. Justin Jefferson just got an extension. Amon-Ra St. Brown just got an extension. Stephon Diggs on a new team now, but signing multiple deals. CeeDee Lamb waiting for an extension, right? Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, some of the best receivers in the league the last 6-7 years. But for some reason, we don't view Michael Pittman in that elite tier. And maybe it's because he works in the short to intermediate range, or he just doesn't put up the same level of touchdowns. Because as you can see right here, he's career high in touchdowns is just 6, only topping 4 touchdowns in a season once in that year, his second year in the NFL. And is this something that, maybe it's just touchdown luck or getting unlucky, but after it's like 3-4 years now, it kind of says, yeah, maybe this is just his role. And it's kind of hard to blame him when last year he had Gardner Minshew as his quarterback, not getting to the red zone often. The year before that was Jonathan Taylor's massive year of 20 touchdowns. But the concern is, even last year when he had this massive season of 156 targets and 109 receptions, as good as it gets, yeah, only 4 touchdowns, but he's still finishing 14th overall. Even in the massive season, when he has like a career peak high, that might be his career high ever for targets in a season. And the big reason why is this right here. His yards per reception, he's just not targeted downfield. 10 yards downfield on average. You would love to see this number closer to 12, 13, especially 14 if you're a number 1 receiver. In past years, just 9, never topping 12 yards per reception. It's hard for him to have those big plays. So when you ask yourself, well, can he put up another 150 target year and have 8 to 10 touchdowns? Yeah, probably, but also will he start to see downfield usage and continue that high volume? Well, now it starts to get unlikely, especially when you consider that Anthony Richardson is now there, and Anthony Richardson is going to bring this mobile aspect, which hurts the ability for Michael Pittman to score touchdowns, which might hurt the ability on some check down passes if also Anthony Richardson is taking off and running. Now, the good thing is Anthony Richardson does love to throw the ball downfield based on his college profile, his film, and just the kind of prospect that he was. But the bad thing is that, like we just mentioned earlier, Michael Pittman has never really proven to be a downfield receiver. And you can call it a couple of plays where he's winning downfield, but mostly, relatively speaking, generally speaking, I should say, in college and the NFL, never really proven to win downfield often. And you could see some of the additions to the team this offseason, and most notably their second round pick, Adonai Mitchell. Some off-field issues is kind of why, or some people believing that there's off-field issues and he doesn't take his diabetes properly or handle it properly. Some of these reasons are why he fell into the second round. He was like a first-round talent receiver, and he's a guy who wins downfield with speed during his time at Texas. That's the type of guy who profiles out better as taking advantage of Anthony Richardson's big arm. And now Zach Moss isn't with the team anymore, so Jonathan Taylor has a full backfield to himself to maybe go right back to his 2021 usage, the last time that he was fully healthy entering a season, and this is what's happening this year. And if he starts to see a lot of usage in the red zone with Richardson, okay, can Pittman really start to spike that big season when it comes to touchdowns? So you kind of need all these moving parts to come together for you, and they definitely can, but you're spending a second or third round pick on a guy. I just want a little bit more security there. As you can see right now in my fantasy blueprint top 250 rankings, Michael Pittman, he currently goes 27th overall, right around that second or third round turn. He's my 36th overall player. And honestly, based on the most recent update that you'll probably be seeing that comes out a day before this video releases, you're going to be probably seeing Michael Pittman slide a little bit more because there's some other guys who've been moving up. I just rather have guys like Derrick Henry, Mike Evans, and even Isaiah Pacheco, although you'd be reaching on Pacheco at that point in the second or third round. I just like those guys more. Now, the next man up is Sam LaPorta. And again, I have to remind you, Lions fans, Iowa fans, where we went to school, just Sam LaPorta fans in general who had him on your team last year. This is a great player. There's nothing wrong with him, but it's based on his current ADP, the reason why I'm a little bit skeptical. And I probably don't have to tell you all how good he was last year, but he played in every single game as a rookie, earning 120 targets as a rookie tight end, I should say, which is like unheard of, finishing as the number 3 tight end in fantasy, and he had 10 touchdowns, which, oh yeah, led all the tight ends. The dude was dominant everywhere, in the short to intermediate range, blocking, downfield, and I mean after the catch downfield, and even when he was banged up, he was playing through injuries. That is a fantasy manager's dream. But now Sam LaPorta is going right now as the 25th overall player. That's the second round, basically second round, late second round, early third round of a lot of drafts. Again, he's a tight end, going as the tight end number 1 right now in drafts. So for him to pay off this value, you're investing in him to be like the next Travis Kelce. Kelce, that guy who's worthy of a late first round, early second round pick if he's really going to pay off this top 25 overall capital at the tight end position. But it just becomes difficult to see this when Amon-Ra St. Brown just got an extension last season. We showed him earlier, he is top 5 since 2021 in overall targets in the NFL. So maybe you could say, oh, but if Amon-Ra misses some games, if he gets banged up, you can say that for just about anybody though going in the top 25 if one of their teammates misses games. So this is kind of a limiting factor. Now there is another thing that you might be thinking. Travis Kelce had a career year, I believe in 2021 when there was Tyreek Hill out there and a lot of other good seasons. Yes, but Tyreek Hill was always that downfield intermediate option. Kelce's always been the underneath option, and that role is Amon-Ra St. Brown on the Lions. And then another thing to point out is the fact that he had 10 touchdowns last year, which is great. An 11.5% touchdown rate though is probably hard to keep up. I mean, just to lead the NFL in tight end touchdowns every single year, you're probably not going to bank on that every year, which means his receiving yards are going to have to take a step forward this year into the 1,000 plus, 1,100 plus yard range to pay off this price tag. And I don't doubt as he enters year 2, especially after such a great rookie year, that he can't put up 1,000 plus yard year at the tight end position. I don't doubt that by any means, but he would also still have to put up some good touchdowns, good receiving numbers, stay healthy, all these things, right, when you're a top 25 pick. It just becomes especially difficult to see when we see Amon-Ra St. Brown is there, and this team still has Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator, which means they're going to be a run-first team with Jared Goff, and that means Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery are going to see a lot of usage and a lot of red zone usage. It feels bad poking holes in Sam LaPorta, such a great talent, and I believe that if, look, he was a 4th round pick where I thought he might slide in, he'd be somebody that I'd be screaming for in fantasy drafts right now as the second option in this Lions solid passing attack, but he's going in basically the end of the second round. And this is where it really gets hard for me because you can see he's currently going about 10 picks before Travis Kelce, okay, 20 picks before Trey McBride, okay, it starts to get a little bit crazy. Dalton Kincaid, 30 picks before him, and even if you scroll down more, you see he's going almost 50 picks before Evan Ingram, who might be the number 2 receiving option and was great the past year and a half to 2 years with Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars. So LaPorta goes a little bit too early for me, and so does this next quarterback who, like LaPorta, is kind of like this shining star type player entering his second year as a starter. And that man's name is the Packers quarterback, Jordan Love. And I'll disclose this. I am a Packers fan, or what's left of the fandom after, you know, covering sports for so long and being jaded on a bunch of playoff losses, but I'm still telling you that he's probably not worth where he's being drafted this season. So that should mean something. Now, obviously, he was great down the stretch last year. He was like one of the most talked about players, making a deep playoff push, and that's despite having a brutal month of October, like one of the worst quarterbacks in October. Now, despite that month of October, he is still able to rank 6th in quarterback efficiency and top 10 in yards per attempt in 2024. And if you took October away, he was also top 10 in accuracy. So there's a lot to like about Jordan Love, as he's still a young quarterback with a young offense and a great, looks like, play caller in Matt LaFleur. And despite that rough month of October, he still finished top 5 in quarterbacks. Yeah, this might be like the most surprising stat. Top 5 in points per game at the quarterback position, and a big reason why was he had 32 touchdown passes. And 32, I think I might have said 35, 32 touchdown passes was the second most in the NFL. When you factor in his rushing TDs, he had 36, which is also top 5 in the NFL. So look, a great efficient passer throwing the ball, no doubt about it. But kind of like Sam LaPorta having 10 receiving touchdowns, can we bank on Jordan Love putting up this type of production, ranking 2nd in passing touchdowns again? Because that's what it's going to take for him to finish right around where he goes in drafts, is like the quarterback 7 or 8, which just makes me a little bit skeptical about his ceiling, where he goes 74th overall, which in a lot of drafts he's going ahead of guys right now like Kyler Murray. If you look across different positions, Deontay Johnson, a wide receiver 1 for his team, Tony Pollard, basically the 1A running back for the Tennessee Titans. Because yes, he had 4 rushing touchdowns last year, but for the most part, he's not really going to pick up a ton of yardage on the ground. Maybe like a CJ Stroud level player, maybe like a Caleb Williams, who will be this year. You get a couple of 100 rushing yards, if that. And that's just really my problem right now. If you look at the tiers in the fantasy blueprint, you can see Jordan Love, for me, he's going rounds before a guy like Jayden Daniels, who I actually have ranked over him. He's actually going like 30 plus picks before Jayden Daniels. He's going 40 plus picks right now, 38 picks to be exact in some drafts if you're looking at Fantasy Pros ADP, before Caleb Williams, and I have him neck and neck with Caleb Williams. So he's just going way before these other guys, and honestly, he kind of just looks very similar. Even Trevor Lawrence, he's going 50 picks before right now in fantasy drafts. Can you tell me the big difference between Jordan Love and Trevor Lawrence? I'm waiting. And maybe in real life you could, but if we're talking about fantasy, I could see Trevor Lawrence having 30 touchdown passes this year and them just being basically the same quarterback, right around the quarterback 12 to 15. Now we'll go back to the running back position, and we'll talk about a trusted veteran over the years in Alvin Kamara, who is now entering his age 30 season. And look, the fella is coming off of, if we're talking fantasy, another great season, where if we just scroll right here via player profiler, last season Alvin Kamara, 3rd in running back fantasy points, posting 17.9 points per game. But his great fantasy finish might make you forget that in real life, Kamara wasn't good last year. It was his 3rd straight season of his efficiency dropping, and this is where he ranked 37th in yards per touch, 46th in broken tackle rate, and 40th in breakaway breakaway run rate. These are all career lows for Alvin Kamara, the guy who's usually dynamic. And look, he's just getting older, and he didn't have the greatest offensive line or offense last year as well. But the reason why he still produced for fantasy was in year one with Derek Carr, the receptions. He had 75 catches, number 2. I mean, this guy as a running back was averaging nearly 6 receptions per game, and it was because Derek Carr, the offensive line broke down due to some injuries and just bad play. Derek Carr was getting pressured more. Whenever that happens, Derek Carr just falls apart. He was checking the ball down more to Alvin Kamara. It was an extension of the run game. Is that really going to be happening this year? They've added some pieces to the offensive line, a new offensive coordinator who we'll talk about in a moment. And that new offensive coordinator is Clint Kubiak. He comes over from the 49ers, spent some time with the Vikings in the past, and if he brings over elements of those offenses, the Shanahan scheme, this is what you're going to get. More play action passing, outside zone runs, yards after the catch, and duo runs. Now, specifically, those outside zone runs will rely on speed and explosiveness and maybe breaking some tackles, as well as the duo runs, and I just don't think Alvin Kamara approaching age 30 will be that guy. Jamal Williams at age 30 definitely wasn't that guy last year. I think it's going to be Kendre Miller, who the rookie last year battled a ton of injuries. The former, I believe, 4th round rookie, might have been third round rookie last year. He just battled injuries, even at the end of his college career. Before the NFL season, picked up 2 injuries. During the NFL season, picked up another one. And then you think about some of the other elements of the Kubiak potential scheme from the 49ers and the Vikings, and it's play action passing and just getting guys in space after the catch. And that's where we can see a nice evolution of the roles of these two players, Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, who in past years, especially last year, were mostly used downfield. It was either the short dump offs or just deep bombs for Derek Carr, not really giving you a consistent offense at all. So I think you're going to see more intermediate passes, slants, crossing routes, yards after the catch, putting the ball in these guys' hands, which would take away some of those check down targets from Kamara. So right now, Alvin Kamara goes in round 5 of drafts, and according to the fantasy blueprint, I just rather have guys like Joe Mixon, the clear running back 1 on his team, and Christian Kirk, who looks like a clear wide receiver 1 on his team. Now, this one might get a little bit of hate because he's kind of like a darling right now. I can see in some Twitter spots, and a lot of people are liking Zay Flowers, and I get it, a second-year player who had a quality rookie season. And I really didn't know what to do with Flowers last season until we got into August in camp and preseason, and a lot more reports were coming out that he was looking like he was going to start in 2 wide receiver sets over either Rashad Bateman or Odell. And look, I was skeptical early on last season because Mark Andrews was still there. The team just signed Odell Beckham to a pretty significant contract, and Rashad Bateman was coming back from injury. But like I said, as the months went on and we got into August, we just started getting a lot of reports like this. I mean, this is a tweet from last year. The people were calling him a joystick. His own head coach was saying he's already looking like a veteran out there. A lot of reports were coming out. This one from Jonas Schaefer, basically saying like, okay, this guy's starting to take on what looks like a spot in 2 wide receiver sets, not just his slot receiver since he's a smaller guy like he did at Boston College, win on the outside as well. And credit to Zay Flowers, that's what happened right away. He was actually starting over both of those guys. Like Odell and Rashad Bateman were finding it hard to, basically because of some injuries, but also just their play, see a full-time role. 60-70+% of the snaps each. Now, the one thing that a lot of people forget is that Zay Flowers benefited a ton with Mark Andrews being out last year. And some people are like writing this off like it doesn't mean anything. And look, maybe it doesn't. Like, this is a small sample. We're talking about 6 games with him out versus 10 games with Mark Andrews in, not even a season's worth of data. But in that sample, 11 games with Mark Andrews on the field, the number 1 target for Lamar Jackson the past 5 years or so, and 17 points, so a 50% increase, more than a 50% increase in fantasy points per game when Mark Andrews was out. I do think it means something, right? He's just seeing more target share, more opportunity, more scheming plays around him. Now, Flowers does profile out as this team's number 1 receiver this year, especially with guys like Odell Beckham Jr. gone, but he might actually be the 4th offensive weapon on the team that they'll rely on, which at first seems absolutely crazy until you remember that they signed Derrick Henry, a team that usually likes to run the ball. That changed last year a little bit under Todd Monken, but they still ran the ball with Gus Edwards. Henry's going to be a factor. Mark Andrews comes back this season and he appears to be healthy, so that's 2 guys right there. And then, oh yeah, the reigning MVP, 2-time MVP Lamar Jackson is still going to be a playmaking threat, somebody who uses his legs. I think all 3 of these guys profile out as having a larger role in the overall offense and game plan than Zay Flowers, which is kind of rare for your number 1 receiver to maybe not even be the 3rd or 4th option on the team. So this is where I get a little bit of skeptical of Flowers, who really wasn't prioritized downfield in the Todd Monken offense last year, his first year as the offensive coordinator. Now, of course, that can change. It was just 1 year. We've seen this change with a guy right here. You can see Jaylen Waddle, his first 2 years in the league. You scroll down and his yards per reception, his first year, he was just a check down monster, 9.8 yards per reception. Second year, leads the NFL in yards per reception with 18.1. Literally goes from like one of the worst wide receivers in his downfield usage to the best in his second year. But a big change here was there's a new offensive coaching staff put in, Mike McDaniel. It's still the same coach and offensive coordinator for the Ravens this year, so you would just have to see an overall shift in Flowers' role. It could happen again, but there was no indications all that much last year. I mean, mean, if anything, maybe you see the rookie Devontae Walker from UNC start to see some more downfield usage in this offense. Deontay Hardy, a former Buffalo Bill as well as New Orleans Saint for some time. He's also a guy who can win downfield. So these could be the guys that do that. Now, Zay Flowers did do it in college, right? He did win on the outside in college. So it is possible. I do think he has a better chance than some of those names I just mentioned. Ancillary pieces like Deontay Hardy and a 4th-round pick and Devontae Walker. It's just a little bit concerning when you factor in everything else we've talked about. And the fact that right now he's going in the 4th round of fantasy drafts ahead of guys like Amari Cooper, Malik Neighbors, Joe Mixon, and Christian Kirk, as I mentioned earlier, who I think are like the #1 options with a bullet in their specific position group on their team. So right now when I'm just in drafts, not only my rankings in the blueprint, but when I'm actually in drafts, I'm passing on Zay Flowers. So that's why I'm recommending that you will probably regret drafting him at his current draft price. And now speaking of that fantasy blueprint, I'll take up 2 seconds of your time. If you want to win your fantasy league, and a lot of you, a couple thousand of you have already acquired this for this season. If you want to win your fantasy league, you just come to the link in the description below and you click this button right here. And what does it do? It pops up a couple of ways to get the blueprint completely risk-free through a couple of our partners right here. There's also a third option if you scroll down. If for some reason those don't help you, you just click join today. And notice how I said completely risk-free. You go through those partners and it's risk-free. If you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I just refund your one-time payment of $10. It's $10 for the entire year, not just your draft, all the way up until your fantasy playoffs and championship game. And like I said, if you don't make your playoffs, you just get that $10 right back 100% risk-free. Even if it wasn't the blueprint's fault, the blueprint could have got you all the way there and it was just a bunch of injuries and you didn't make the playoffs for some reason, doesn't matter. So if you want to use the tools that I use in all of my drafts, 250 plus a year when you factor in all the best ball drafts, and thousands of people have used in the past and already this year, you can just scan the QR code on the screen or click that link in the description below to get access to your fantasy blueprint today. Next man up, we go to the tight end position, and it's another Packer on this list. It's Luke Musgrave, who had an exciting, or he was at least expected to have an exciting rookie season. A lot of people like drafting him last year as like a late round tight end sleeper, and for good reason. I mean, the dude was one of the most athletic tight ends we've seen in quite some time coming out. These are the player profile or workout metrics. You can see 94th percentile speed score. The closer this is to 100%, the better. Burst score was really good. His size was great. But the downsides to his game were a bit obvious, and a lot of people were pointing to this. I mean, first off, he didn't really put up all that much college production because of injuries, and a little bit because of the offense that he was in. But you can see right here, he played in 22 college games. If you look at his games over 4 seasons, he only had one season of over 6 games right here, 2021. And in that year, 22 catches, 304 yards. None of this is going to make it all that exciting. Had a couple of injuries that held him back, especially in his final year in 2022. But all of the stuff that he showed on film in those limited samples, and then his athleticism, had a lot of people excited about him, including the Packers, which is why they took him in the 2nd round. But a lot of these college issues and the good things flashed in his rookie year. We're talking about some great catches, but also some drops, some falling down on breakaways after that. And then the injury bug also struck him. Ultimately, he missed 6 games due to injury. And honestly, none of these are like the biggest reason why I'm worried heading into this year, as much as the fact that he has legit competition on his own team at the same position in Tucker Kraft, who last year, this Packers team took him in the 3rd round, just 1 round later than Luke Musgrave. And Kraft is also highly athletic. And look, he's not as good of a pass catcher as one Musgrave, but he's a better blocker. And he was one of the best blockers in the entire NFL down the stretch last season, especially into the playoffs when he was healthy. And he was capable enough in the receiving game to keep him on the field, especially when Musgrave was hurt. He was getting a lot more run. Kraft earned 6+ targets in 5 of his last 8 games to end the year. And you compare that to Luke Musgrave, who in his 11 games only had 3 spots where he had 6 or more targets. Now, of course, those are samples where some other receivers weren't on the field and Musgrave wasn't on the field, so Kraft can see some more. So it is skewed there, but it was just good to see that he can actually put up production in big games, like must-win games at the end of the year and the postseason. Heading into year 2, Musgrave has to get healthy and show that he can block. I'm a little bit worried that he might just turn into like a Mike Gesicki, extremely athletic tight end who can catch passes but never stay on the field enough because he can't block. And right now, Luke Musgrave, he's my number 20 tight end in the fantasy tiers. You can see he's in red because I'm just lower than the market, but he's going earlier than this in drafts, and he's actually going ahead of some other guys, like right around where Pat Freiermuth goes. He's going ahead of Hunter Henry, the clear number 1 tight end on his team, ahead of Juwan Johnson, who right now is dealing with an injury. We'll have to see what happens there, but the clear number 1 on his team in a limited receiving core as well. So in like round 13 of fantasy drafts, you could literally wait 2, 3, 4 more rounds and get a very similar level tight end. So why not just do that? Next up, we head back to the running back position, and it is J.K. Dobbins, who lately has actually been generating some buzz as training camp has started, which is kind of a surprise to me. He's now being drafted in round 13, and here's the issue. It means he's going around guys like Darnell Mooney, the potential number 2 receiver on an improved Atlanta Falcons team, and Jalen Polk, the potential number 1 receiver for the Patriots, even Tyler Algier, a nice backup, and that this doesn't feel right. Because all those players are healthy, where J.K. Dobbins arguably isn't. I mean, over the last 3 years, or really about 3 years or so, a little bit less, he suffered 2 brutal injuries. An ACL tear, which kept him out all of 2021 and limited him for about half the games or more in 2022, and then he comes back in week 1 of 2023, and I mean, this is just brutal for the guy. Like, it just absolutely sucks, and now he can't get like a big contract after that, at least not right now. Gets a torn Achilles, Achilles, which is maybe the worst running back injury. We really haven't seen anybody come back for this and be successful. Like the two guys in recent memory at the running back position I want to talk about here. The two guys are number one, D'Onta Foreman, who took a couple years to come back and then put up, average fine numbers with the Panthers and Bears. And then the big one was Cam Akers because he came back in like record time, the exact same year, 5 to 6 months later. But here's the problem with that one. You scroll here, he came back. He really didn't do much when he came back. It was kind of overstated a little bit because he came back for the postseason where it was still like Darrell Henderson seeing work and some other guys. And then in his final year after that, he doesn't really start getting involved until week 13 when he sees 78% of the snaps. So it took him, he came back in 5 or 6 months, but it took him about a year and a half to actually get back to a full-time role, be able to handle a full workload, and then he was successful down the stretch, but then we know how that kind of turned out. Another injury last year, just brutal for him as well. Now, Dobbins is expecting to make a return just exactly 1 year, right when week 1 comes, 1 year from that last Achilles, but can we expect him to be full back to explosiveness and be able to handle a workload? Probably not. Now, the good news is he isn't being drafted like that, as he's now a member of the Chargers, where there's a couple other backs that we'll talk about that are on this team, but he also isn't being paid to be the workhorse back. You can see right here, his fully guaranteed money, we've talked about this in the past, just $50,000 according to Over the Cap, which is like some of the lowest guaranteed money you'll see. Still a lot of money, still a very good contract, for a year's worth of work, and then you get incentives on top of that, up to $1.6 million. But relatively speaking, for running backs and NFL players, $50,000 isn't a lot, which means that they're not invested in him and to play him. And if they had to cut him, if there was other guys in camp who were standing out, like a rookie they drafted, they could cut Dobbins. Now, also on this team, the team signed Gus Edwards, who right now, based on contract and, just not really dealing with as many injuries as Dobbins, looks to be profiling out as the running back one. But they also drafted a 6th rounder in Kamani Vidal, who's this exciting back. He didn't play as much at Troy in terms of tougher competition, but able to pass protect. That's a big one. Able to catch passes, dynamic, explosive runner, big runner too at 215 pounds or so. So I see Dobbins going in round 13, and he's not being drafted like in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round where he has to get a lot of volume, but I also don't even know if he's going to be second on this team in overall carries, and that's where the issue comes in. Now, before we get into the next running back who I think you need to avoid, and this one might surprise some people, I just want to say, hey, over 60% of people who watch these videos aren't subscribed. That's a big number, and I have a goal to get that down to just 50%, 50-50. So just double check to make sure you're subscribed to this channel because it goes a really long way. And that running back who might surprise some of you is James Conner, because he's been one of the most consistent backs the last 2 years since joining the Arizona Cardinals. But during that time, he didn't really have any competition. I mean, Amari DiMercato was like his biggest threat last year. Who, right? And then the year before that, and kind of last year, Keontae Ingram, who the team almost cut after drafting him a couple of years back. And when I say almost cut, he's no longer on the team. I mean, the same year that they drafted Keontae Ingram, they almost cut him in that same year. But now there's some serious competition on this team. I mean, Amari DiMercato is still there. I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about 3rd round pick, the 2nd pick of the 3rd round in Trey Benson, the 2nd running back that went in the NFL draft. I think he's at worst the top 2 back in the NFL draft. He was my number 1 back. And here's the thing about Trey Benson. He brings speed and size. He has those things, which is fantastic. And also he knows how to break tackles. Kind of like James Conner. He profiles out like him, except he's a lot younger and healthier of a back. And also probably a faster back as well. But despite all this, James Conner was still really good last year. He ranked top 10 in broken tackle rate and put up over 125 yards per game his final 5 games of the year. But the issue now is James Conner is 29 years old. And as you can see right here, his game played every single year of his career, his average is missing 4 games a year. That's what he's missed the last couple of years. You scroll down. Okay, 1 year he stayed healthy. 2021 only missed 2 games. But on average, he's missing 4+ games a year. As you can see as we scroll right here, these are the games that he's played in, 12, 13. So he's missing on average 4 games a year. That's not even counting when he's on the injury report. I mean, this just has written all over it the veteran running back who's going to lose his job to a more exciting and capable rookie RB. And maybe that happens in week 11 when the Cardinals have their bye week. Maybe even happens before. But if it happens in week 11, that means you're going to start to get more Trey Benson usage as the fantasy playoffs approach and down the stretch of your fantasy season, which is like the most important time. So right now, James Conner goes in round 7, which might feel fine to you, but if he's going to start to lose some work down the stretch, if our theory is correct there, then he's not valuable at the most important time of the year, which is not worth the 7th round pick. The next guy up is a running back, and some of you might not be familiar with him. He's Jaylen Wright. He was a 4th round pick, now a member of the Miami Dolphins, which is the perfect spot for him because this dude is very fast. And what does the Dolphins offense do? They love speed. He is 4.38 speed. That 40 time is great at his size, which is not small, 210 pounds. It makes him not only the biggest running back on this team, if we're talking their top 3 backs, but the best speed and size and power combo. And not to mention, last season, he led college football in explosive runs, having 35 runs of 10+ yards on just 136 carries. That's a 26% rate. So literally more than 1 out of 4 of his runs went for an explosive run, which is just nuts. And this led to Jaylen Wright putting up over 1,000 yards last year with his receiving yards over 1,100. He was never really the guy to take on a full workload. You can see here 146, 137 touches. That wasn't his thing. That's maybe like a little bit of a knock against him, but the biggest knock is this next fact. He saw the most fronts of just 3 and 4 guys in the box. When there's only 3 or 4 guys in the box, that means they're dropping back, defending the pass, and they're not really worried about it. I mean, he had Joe Milton just throwing bombs as quarterback in college. They're not really worried about what's happening with the running back, which means it's easy to get those explosive runs and maybe pad your stats. And then he's in an offense where Devon Achane is still going to see 10 to 12 touches a game. Raheem Mostert re-signed. Yes, he's older, still going to see when healthy 10 to 12 touches a game, which makes it tough to want to draft Jaylen Wright, the RB3 on this team. And I get it. Both of those guys, Raheem Mostert, injury history and older. Devon Achane, smaller back, dealt with multiple injuries on the injury report 11 times last year. I get the idea of saying, oh, if one of those guys goes down, Jaylen Wright slides in for like 12 plus touches. Now, I understand that, but my thing is just why not take a guy that just needs one injury or automatically will be involved in the offense? Like guys who go around him like Kendre Miller, Ty Chandler, even guys that go after him, Antonio Gibson, Rico Dottle, even Chuba Hubbard. These guys are going to be the number 2 running back on their team at the very worst. Ray Davis goes a lot later, right? Tyler Algier goes a lot later. Number 2 running backs on their team at worst, and we each week should see 6, 8 plus touches. So I just think we're hoping for too much here. He's an exciting rookie that I liked. I think there's a little bit of rawness to his game, but the landing spot wasn't the greatest when you're starting out as the RB3 on your team. And then there's this one that's going to hurt a lot, and it's Nick Chubb, who, look, if you trust his power and his mindset and just his overall eliteness as a player, as a person to come back and beat his round 10 draft capital right now in fantasy, then go ahead and draft him. But if you don't recall, he suffered a gruesome knee injury in week 2 last year, and I'm not going to go ahead and show you the clip. It's just terrible, but he hurt his knee, meniscus, ACL, and MCL, all those. So that's 4 injuries to the same leg, and he had a similar injury in college, which is, they said, might be a career ender, and he was able to come back from that, but can he do it again? Especially now when we consider, you can see his touches per year right here. He has a couple of 300 touch seasons, and you scroll up right here, including his receptions, the dude has over 1,350 career touches. Now entering his age 29 season, he's going to turn 29 this year. Those things don't bode well to come back from this same type of injury that people thought was a season and career ender when you were just 20 years old with no NFL touches. And what that 1,300 total NFL touches doesn't really put in is all the hits that he was taking weekly in practice, and they're not the same level of hits, but just the wear and tear on the body, training every offseason. It's just going to make it harder to recover. And according to Fantasy Sharks, Nick Chubb, players with a similar injury at a similar age, has a 74% chance to miss at least 3 games this year, and that's not even including if he starts the year on the PUP list, meaning he misses automatically 4 games. So at this point, I'm just not willing to draft Nick Chubb in round 10. I mean, his own teammate only goes a couple of picks before him in Jerome Ford, who should be seeing a larger workload to start the season. Guys who go after him might not miss any games, at least to start the year, and have a real chance right away to see like 8 to 10 plus touches in Gus Edwards and Zach Charbonnet, and then you get this upside back or upside tier of guys in Charbonnet, Kendre Miller, Tyler Chandler, who I just rather get later on and just get a more reliable option in like early on in the draft, maybe get a Jaylen Warren in round 8 or Jonathan Brooks, and then go to a Nick Chubb. And I know saying Jonathan Brooks coming off an ACL there is going to get a lot of people crazy. It's nowhere near the same type of injury that Nick Chubb just had. Jonathan Brooks is a lot younger, just 1 clean ACL tear to 1 ligament, not 4 different injuries. Basically, in that exact same round of the draft in round 10, you can get Trey Benson a lot of the times. You can get Brian Robinson. Maybe not an underdog draft at this point, but when you're in your leagues, in your home leagues, you'll definitely be able to get those guys instead. Now, like I said, if you just like Nick Chubb and you see him in round 10 or round 11 and you say, screw it, maybe he can come back. Maybe he could beat the odds. He would be the guy to do it. He's been one of the best, if not the best, pure runners in the NFL since entering the league. Then by all means, go ahead and do it. I don't want to end this on a completely positive note for a guy recovering from something that is really difficult to come back from. I think I might have said I don't want to end the video on a positive note. I meant I do want to end the video on a positive note, not a negative note. Let me get out of here before I say some more dumb things. If you want to actually see, these are the guys that we don't want to draft at their current ADP. Of course, that can change if their ADP changes, right? You might have regrets right now. But if you want to see the guys who are going to break out this year, well, then let me find my spot here. Check out this lovely video right over here that YouTube's going to pop up. Our top 10 breakouts as of right now for fantasy football. Appreciate you all tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.